For those of you just joining in, we do have a special show tonight with some special guests. So if you think that the sound is off, it's not. And also joining us this evening, besides Meir Jolovitz, returning again is Ryan Bellerose, a self-proclaimed Zionist from northern Alberta who recognizes the common denominators between the indigenous Canadians, Americans, and the Jews.
Indigenous status means that your people had a coalescence and a genesis. Everything that makes Jews Jewish, their spirituality, their traditions, their culture, their language, everything, it stems from Israel. If you actually look at the history of the land of Israel, you can see that at one point there was this people that came here. Now this is important to understand. After like 2,000 years, their descendants that had been forcibly displaced, they had maintained a nation in exile, which means that they maintained their language, they maintained their culture, they maintained their traditions.
And despite the persecution and everything else that happened to them, the Jews managed to maintain a continuous presence in the land of Israel for over 3,000 years.
Very appropriate based on the times and what's happening today in both Israel and in Afghanistan. Anybody want to hear what it sounds like chanted? Well, if you're listening, you don't have much choice.
Adonai Elohecha biyadecha vishavita shivyo.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm going to ask everyone who's joining us if you could please share this with the various pages and groups that you're part of on social media. We'll reach a lot more people, have a stronger impact. There's a lot that we have to discuss tonight. We have some great guests tonight. We have Meir Jolovitz with us, and we have Ryan Bellerose. And there's a lot going on in the world right now, a lot that affects our Jewish community as well, and Israel and the West. And we're going to dive right into it. But before anything, as we do with every show that we have, we start with a few words from the Parsha. It's really special to start this show in such a way, and I feel really honored that we've had this show going since last November. And every single episode that we have, every single show, we start with some words from the Parsha and see how it applies to exactly what is going on. So this Parsha is called Parshas Kitzetzi, and what it says, right in the beginning of it, what it says, and it says, when you go to war against your enemies. Now, my Rabbi Meir Kahana, would comment on this, and he would say, why does it say here in the first sentence, when you go to war against your enemies? Obviously, when you go to war, you're not going against anyone but your enemies. So what's going on here? The Jewish people have to understand that these people that they're going to war against are their enemies. Now, we have organizations amongst us, J Street, J Space. We have people like Bernie Farber. We have other real winners that tell us that those who espouse BDS, for instance, that march Free Palestine, that they don't present any danger to the Jewish community. In fact, there's going to be it's been announced by an organization called Islamic Relief Canada, and Israel, the state of Israel has listed Islamic Relief Worldwide as an organization that raises funds for and gives funding to Hamas. So Israel has listed Islamic Relief Worldwide. Islamic Relief Canada has engaged in extreme anti-Israel activities. And they are planning, they're sponsoring for the 28th of August, a motorcycle ride through the Jewish community, Bikers for Palestine. Now, Bernie Farber takes pictures with officials from Islamic Relief Canada. Rabbi Karupkin from the largest synagogue in Canada, the Bayit, has appeared on a show to show friendship with people from Islamic Relief Canada. The show was under Islamic Relief Canada, that they're not so bad. And they're going to have this bike ride through the Jewish community on Shabbat just before the high holidays to say, free Palestine, to say, destroy Israel. So when the Parsha says, when you go to war against your enemies, understand who your enemy is. We have seen the collapse in Afghanistan of the United States policy under Biden in Afghanistan. The most sophisticated weapons are now in the hands of the Taliban. The Taliban and Hamas are one. They agree on everything, and they both want Israel destroyed. Our so-called leaders that say to trust the woke generation and the progressives. The United States Embassy 2 months ago was flying a flag, the LGBT flag. Did they really think they're impressing the people in Afghanistan? Did they really think that they were going to have people in Afghanistan embrace them? This is a complete catastrophe, the policy of the Biden administration. And again, the most sophisticated arms falling into the hands of the Taliban. And they would love to get those arms to Hamas. And organizations that are sponsoring these motorcycle rides through the Jewish community, Free Palestine, support that Hamas. Or they use different names that mean the same thing. I saw their rallies. I hear the chants in support of the Intifada. Now, I mentioned the bike ride coming up. Now, let me just read you something. The official statement from the UJA on this. Let me just get this. I should put it into perspective. It's from the UJA. No, where is it? Not fully there. The UJA is cautioning the Jewish community just to ignore the anti-Israel, pro-Hamas bike ride through the Jewish community. Look the other way. Even if they gather in front of synagogues, look the other way. I received a call last night from a prominent rabbi in Toronto's Jewish community, extremely concerned about this. We have a short clip we'd like to show, in fact, and it brings back memories. It brings back memories of, in 1977, a group of neo-Nazis, Hitler supporters, wanted to march in a suburb of Chicago, Skokie, Illinois. They wanted to say Hitler was right, and in Skokie, Illinois, it was a large concentration of Holocaust survivors. We have a short clip to show.
As you know, one of our important jobs in the Anti-Defamation League of the B'nai B'rith is to keep a close watch on anti-Semitic activities in the United States. The old German-American Bund of the 30s was financed by the German government itself, and
concern, and we intend to act in utmost good faith to assure the safety
Excuse me.
and the protection.
I beg your pardon. I would like to ask a question.
Well, yes, sir, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have in a moment or two. However, there are...
With respect, Your Honor, not you. The other one. The one from the Chicago Anti-Defamation.
I think we should hold all questions for Mr. Rosen until...
Just said that he would be happy to answer questions. I'm sorry if I'm out of order, but I do have a question.
No, it's all right. It's all right. I'd be happy to defer a question to Mr. Rosen. Go ahead, sir. Ask your question.
I am Max Feldman. I am the president and founder of Precision Fabricating Incorporated. I was very young, but I remember what they said. Nazis, stormtroopers, hoodlums in the street.
For comment from the floor, and we do have outside guests.
You know what this is? A tattoo. I came here to sit, to listen, not to say anything. But I don't want to hear about tactics and strategies. This is not a game. I will not go home. I will not pull down the window shades. Not this time. Not in my own town, where I made it business and a home, where I raised my child. If a Nazi marches here in Skokie, you can believe me, I will be there. I will be there with baseball bats, with a gun, with anything. I will be in Skokie with the Nazis alive.
The message of the Nazis, the message of Hamas is exactly the same. Let's bring Mayor Jolovitz. Mayor, it's wonderful to have you. Mayor, join us and shed some light onto this, and then we'll bring Ryan on and we'll all discuss it as well.
Well, thank you. I was in Skokie at the time. I went to Skokie. I was living in Phoenix, and to show you the disrespect that the Nazis had for the Jewish establishment and the fear that they had for the Jewish radical, as we were called at the time, it's evidenced by what I'm about to tell you. The march was originally scheduled. They got a permit to march in Skokie, as you mentioned. Skokie, because it had the largest, most concentrated collection of Holocaust survivors in any place in America. Now, at the time, Rabbi Kahana said, it's instructive to note that while the Nazis hate the blacks as much, you don't see any planned Nazi march in Harlem, because the Nazis understood exactly what would happen to them in Harlem. The black leaders would not tell them to go home and close the curtains, draw the curtains, as they told us at the time. So instead, they chose the Jews because they anticipated that the Jewish response would be feeble, or that it would not be at all. When JDL announced that it was coming, the Nazis, what they cleverly tried to do is move the march from Sunday, when it was permitted, to Saturday, to Shabbat, knowing that a large portion of the Jewish Defense League contingent, which came in to meet the Nazi threat, might have been Shomer Shabbat and would not travel. In fact, it actually upset my plans. I was in Arizona at the time. I had organized a group of 122 people who were going to go to Skokie to fight the Nazis. When the Nazis changed their date at the very last moment, 3 of us were able to catch a flight. 3 of us. So the Nazis knew what they were doing. Remarkably, it was the only time that I remember in demonstrations that the Jews representing the anti-Nazi element, the other anti-Nazi element were actually the socialists, who were looking for a good fight also with the Nazis. And even though the Nazis numbered only 28, it was the police protection that brought them into the area, allowed them to demonstrate, and of course they were then ushered out. We found out later that the reason that they were able to appear in this perimeter of 3,000 activists who were there to break some limbs was because they used a postal truck, a federal postal truck, in order to sneak them in. The federal authorities let them do their demonstration. Frank Collins was their leader, and they disappeared. But the remarkable thing is that most of the noise that was made by the Jewish establishment, perhaps all of the noise that was made by the Jewish establishment, was not directed at the Nazis. It was directed at the element that they described as the Jewish radicals who were only making the situation worse. So when you began this this episode with a Dvar Torah about the enemy, the greatest enemy the Jews have faced in trying to seek the liberation that they have sought for 2,000 years until the establishment of the State of Israel, most frequently came from the Jewish establishment that didn't want to upset the situation. It's tragic. The reference that I've made before, there was a cartoon character, an opossum by the name of Pogo. Some of the old timers might remember Pogo. And the most famous words ever articulated by Pogo, this opossum, first used in 1953 and became famous in 1970 during the Vietnam War when it was recirculated. Pogo the opossum said, "We have met the enemy and he is us."
Mm-hmm. It's astounding.
Yeah.
Simply astounding. Ryan, can Ryan join us? Is Ryan there? Ryan, oh, where is he?
It was there for a second. Can you hear me now?
Oh, we can hear you. Ryan, you see what's going on with Afghanistan, complete nuttiness, the woke generation, and you see, what's going on. I mentioned they want to ride through the Jewish community saying, free Palestine, throw the Jews out, and the UJ is just saying, don't do anything.
I mean, Meir, I was with you. What was that? The Walk for Israel, when the police came and told us that under no circumstances would they allow those idiots to go walking through the Walk for Israel. So because we were standing between them and the whole street there where they wanted to go, and then as soon as they told us that and then refused to, they made us leave. So after we left, then we found out that they let those guys go walking through and they were harassing people.
Right.
So I mean. I know that like for the last 5 years, they've been allowing these idiots for the Al-Quds Day. I mean, they literally cordoned off an entire street. Toronto taxpayers paid for that. Toronto taxpayers paid for the extra police presence. And this is after the mayor came right out and said, we're not going to allow anti-Semitic hate fests. And yet they had, what's his name there? The idiot from the radio show was over there chanting about how Israel's evil and the synagogue of Satan. And he's using a loudspeaker to do it. And I mean, and meanwhile, we're all sitting around talking about, like never again, we're not going to allow this stuff to happen. But it's people like you and Meir and me and people that are standing up and saying, we don't like this and we're not going to put up with it. But the people that are in power are not only empowering it, but they look the other way. And then when we try to do something about it, we're the ones that get told that we're extremists and that we're just trying to cause problems. And all we're doing is standing up to these idiots.
100%. 100%. One other thing, I sent a letter out last night to Bill Blair, who's the Minister of Public Safety, regarding this matter with the Islamic Relief Canada sponsoring the Bikers for Palestine. And it's not like I have any faith that anything's going to really happen with this letter, but just for the record, I sent the letter. But I did point out also that Islamic Relief Canada is a charity. And I think it would be good if a number of people would start maybe sending out letters to Revenue Canada that you're allowing a registered charity to sponsor incitement in the Jewish community. And that's what these tax dollars are going towards. And see if there could be any kind of momentum to have their charitable status revoked.
I think that's a great that's a great idea, Meir. The other thing too, you and I had talked about this actually. That idiot Firas or whatever his name is, the one that he was going through a Jewish neighborhood, with his signs. I mean, they're doing this specifically now to target Jewish neighborhoods. They're trying to intimidate Jewish people. Yeah. I honestly think that these are the days when we need a strong JDL Canada again. And you know what? some guy wants to go and pull that nonsense, then maybe somebody should go give him a physics lesson.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's no question about it that there's a certain lesson for anti-Semitic thugs, and it's not in the form of a letter. It's in the form of the logo of the JDL. There's no question about it.
Yeah, because I mean, at this point, I think we've established now, like the Jewish government in exile, that's what they call themselves, the federations and the UJA and all that. They're not going to do anything other than write some really angry emails, and B'nai B'rith will talk about how they're strongly condemning it. Nobody gives a crap. I mean, those guys they keep doing this stuff, and I mean, they're planning this bike ride. I'll be honest with you. If some idiot tried that bike ride in front of my house, I'd stick a stick in his spokes. Like, I'm not going to put up with that kind of crap.
Meir,
I'm sorry. I laugh, Ryan. Forgive me. An old memory. When I was a graduate student at Arizona State University, the Arabs on campus, using campus dollars, decided that they were going to show the film The Palestinians, a documentary with Vanessa Redgrave. And there were about 18 of us, and there were 200 of the Arabs, so-called Palestinians. And as you aren't allowed to bring, by American law, an axe to a movie in the United States, certainly not in campus.
Weird.
But there was nothing in the statute that said you couldn't bring an axe handle. So there were 15 or 18 of us who brought the axe handle. It was a nice purchase at, I don't know what the equivalent of Home Depot was at the time. And as I was about to approach, I see the head of the Arab group riding his bicycle towards me. And before I had a time to sort of call a committee to discuss what we might do, I stuck the axe handle in his front wheel. Now the wheel was contorted sort of in the shape of the greater land of Israel, and he took a skid. He came up, his face was bruised, his elbows, he was bleeding. What I didn't see was 75 feet away was a campus cop at Arizona State University who saw this happen. And it's funny, I'm putting this on the broadcast, and the campus cop, within 2 seconds, he was on top of us. And as he approached, I was smart enough to yell at the cop, "Arrest him! He called me a dirty Jew! He called me a dirty Jew!" Now the cop sees the Arab on the ground, bleeding, unaware of what just happened. Now the reality is, he was calling me a dirty Jew in the film that he was about to show. I just sort of brought it to the policeman's attention, and I said, "I want him arrested. I want him arrested." The policeman, somewhat phased, looked at me and he said, "You get out of here. Get out of here." And he looks at the guy who's bleeding in the ground. He goes, "Why would you do that? Why would you do that?" It's interesting. It's hard to be a radical without having some kind of episodes that humor one's soul, because otherwise it's really a dark fight that we fight. But what you just said, Ryan, forgive me, I haven't thought of that incident in decades, but you reminded me.
Well, I mean, like, Meir was with me. I went to the Al-Quds Day and I live streamed it, right? Because a lot of people, I think that the biggest thing we're fighting, and I know that everybody wants to talk about how it's the anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is the problem, but it's also a symptom. Like the real problem is the sheer ignorance, because most of the people that I know, they don't know any Jews. And if they do know Jews, they know Jews that aren't very Jewish. Like they're Jews that don't wear a kippah. They're Jews that don't really do anything to manifest being Jewish. So they think that Jews are just like everybody else. So then all of a sudden they see a guy wearing a kippah, and it's like, what the hell? I didn't know Jews wore kippahs. And like, they don't know anything about Jews. So like when I try to tell them that these people are threatening Jewish people, they don't understand like why some of this stuff is a threat. They don't understand why, like when I'm walking through the Al-Quds Day and I'm filming, they didn't understand why some guy yelling, "You're a Jew," was like actually kind of trying to threaten me. They didn't understand that. They're like, "No, he was just calling you a Jew." And I'm like, do you understand that when they chant stuff like Khyber, Ya Yahud, they're literally saying there's a village called Khyber that was wiped out by Muhammad, They're telling me they want to kill me. That's what they're saying when they do that. And the average Canadian doesn't know this kind of stuff.
By the way, Muhammad just didn't kill, he also beheaded 600 Jews.
Yeah.
I do want to mention something, and I want to take it in a direction slightly different than what you just suggested. As a general rule, I think what you've said is correct. But I want to tell you, that's just the average Joe in the street. Surveys were done. Surveys were done with people asking them what percentage of the world's population do you think it's Jewish? Now, the actual percentage is 0.2% of the world's population. And people were guessing, these are legitimate surveys that were done between, this is remarkable, between 50 and 700 million. 700 million Jews in the world. They assumed as much. Now, where I might beg to differ is where the average person might be anti-Semitic and not know the core. We were talking about Nazis. We were talking about neo-Nazis. They know exactly. They knew more about Judaism than Reform Jews in America know. The reason, when you look at the degradation of Jews, for example, I've mentioned before in this broadcast, both my parents are Holocaust survivors, my father having survived 13 camps. The Nazis knew what they were doing. The reason my father had a number tattooed on his arm is because Jews aren't allowed to tattoo. The reason the Jews had their heads shaved was because Jews were told to maintain the hair. The reason Jews were marched naked was because it was in complete contrast to the modesty that's preached by Judaism. In this particular case, the Nazis knew exactly what they were doing. They knew everything about Judaism. They targeted Judaism. When I've spoken to a couple of, never mind non-Jews, Jews, and I mentioned that Tisha B'Av, the 9th of the month of Av, is one of the most solemn, it is the most solemn day on the Jewish calendar, more so than Yom Kippur. And I mentioned the things that happened on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. And I mentioned the destruction of the first temple, the destruction of the second temple. You're talking about events throughout history, from the Inquisition to the Warsaw Ghetto, events, pogroms, multiple events, which were targeting Jews and which led to the mass slaughter of Jews throughout history, multiple events. So someone said to me, quite understandably, how could it be that on the 9th of Av, it just coincidentally, the Jewish calendar, all these events, 16, 17 tragic events in Jewish history occurred on that day? And the answer is a very simple one. That after the fall of the first temple, and again the second temple a couple of centuries later, that marked the 9th of Av. The anti-Semites throughout history, whatever region or country, they understood that was the day that marked Jewish suffering. And quite often, and specifically so, they used that date to target the pogrom against the Jews, to do these things. That's the day that the Jews have suffered historically. We will contribute to that suffering. So in this particular case, the enemy, I'm not talking about the average fellow in the street, the enemy of the Jews knows exactly what he is doing.
I'm not arguing against that. What I'm saying though, okay, so like I ascribe to the 80-10-10 rule, which means 80% of the people don't give a shit. 10% hate you and 10% love you, right? So I don't really think that we're ever going to change somebody like that Fearless idiot. I don't think we're going to change CJPME. Those people they're true believers. They've drunk the Kool-Aid, okay? We're not going to, like, you know what? You might get a one-off here and there where you turn one of them, but the truth is those people are entrenched in their opinions. They hate Jews, and that's the bottom line.
That is true.
There's about 80% of, like, in my view, I think there's about 80% that even if they're slightly anti-Semitic, and look, I just posted a video on my Facebook that was, it's called What is a Jew? And a friend of mine, Michael Hart, made that video back in like 1991. And you're exactly right. He actually asked one guy, how many Jews do you think there are in the world? The guy looked at him, and then Michael said, well, there's 5 billion people in the world. How many do you think are Jews? And the guy looked at him, no joke. He actually said, well, yeah, 5 billion sounds about right. I mean, the sheer ignorance is appalling. People don't know anything about Jews. They don't know how many Jews there are. one woman actually said, like, he asked her point blank, this is why that video, to me, we need to do something more modern and do it again. Because this one woman actually said, well, the Jews are the real Christians. And he goes, what do you mean? Like, he looked at her like, what are you saying? And she said, well, you know, they're good people. But she doesn't know that you guys don't. And she said they follow Christmas just at a different time. Like, these are the kinds of things, dude, that are just, the sheer ignorance is appalling. And look, like I joke with Meir, I'm an Indian from northern Alberta. There's no Jews where I live, right? I had to take the onus of like actually meeting Jewish people, talking to them, listening to them. And when I did that, I actually learned a little bit about them. But the truth of the matter is, I'm a rarity, right? People don't go out of their way to meet people they don't know, which means we need to get Jewish people to be more visible. I mean, talk more about Jewish identity, Judaism, being Jewish, why it's important. These are the kinds of things, because if we can get that, if we can start people doing that, we can fight some of the ignorance. Now, you're 100% right. The people that really, really hate Jews, they probably study Jews more than Reformed Jews do, right? They know the dates, they know the things, and like they know the things that they need to know so that they can hate on Jews more effectively. And I know that. Like, I'm not stupid and I'm not naive, but what I'm saying is we need to get more Jews to be visible. We need to be out there. Like, there was a campaign that Sam Eskenazi started, and it was basically end Jew hate, and they were all over the bus benches. And somebody just defaced one of those things. Yep. And it's about end Jew hatred. And what did they put on it? They put free Palestine. As if every Jew in Canada is somehow responsible for what goes on in the Middle East. And they make it sound like Jews returning to their ancestral homeland is some sort of horrific settler colonialist project, when it's literally Indigenous people going home to their ancestral land.
Ryan,
we have to fight.
I'm sorry, I apologize in advance, because I certainly don't mean to be a naysayer here.
Yeah, sure.
Here's where my problem is. I've lived a little longer than you have, but it didn't take me too long to understand the point that I'm going to make. Sure. For every Mayor Weinstein out there, there are 120 Woody Allens out there. For every Jew, if I told you, if there was a lecture, I mean, I realize we live in the world of COVID right now and they're not doing lectures. There is a lecture series that comes to Phoenix, Arizona. It's usually, condensed in a 2.5, 3 month period. They bring in different scholars, commentators. It could be about geography, about history, and everything else. And they're very careful not to bring someone who might be overly controversial. But the audience, which is normally about 300 strong, all Jews, and as my son, who is today 35 years old, mentioned when he and I went about 3 years ago, he stood up and was to ask a question, and they said, do you have a question? He said, well, actually, mine is a comment. He goes, I look around the room to the left and to the right. He goes, I'm 33 or 32 years old at the time. And he said, guy? I'm the youngest here by 2 decades. Yeah. By 2 decades. Now, the remarkable thing is, it isn't just that he was the youngest there. None of their children were there, were interested, even when speaking about existential elements that refer to the state of Israel. But the other thing is, most of them are Reform Jews who listen to the Reform rabbi, he or she, who basically tells them, gives them a perspective of Israel in the Middle East, which is so uniquely wrong. They describe the conflict 97%, well, I'll credit the Orthodox Jews. 90% of the Jews in America believe that the conflict in the Middle East isn't an Arab war against the Jews. It's an Israel-Palestinian war, and it is one that can be solved by intelligent people sitting down, like-minded, and coming up with certain territorial lines. The suggestion is that the conflict is territorial, rather than the fact that the conflict is a religious, ideological, cultural. It's a war of civilizations, and they refuse to recognize it. Now, when someone asks me,
then it's unsolvable. Look, you're not actually saying anything that I disagree with. I mean, my biggest problem isn't that there's anti-Semitism. My biggest problem is that so much of it is rank ignorance, right? Like, like, look, I could sit here and go off about anti-Semitism. I mean, I've experienced anti-Semitism myself, and I'm not even Jewish. I was basically at a talk, a speaker's corner, and a pro-Palestinian idiot said to me, "I'm sorry the Nazis missed some of your family." And I'm standing there with a Jewish friend of mine, and I just looked at him like I was in shock. The guy was on crutches, or I'm not certain that I wouldn't have actually given him a physics lesson. I'm pretty sure I would have, because it was about 10 years ago, and I would still do that from time to time. But I mean, he said that, and then afterwards, when they apologized, they didn't apologize by saying, what he said was really horrific and wrong. They apologized, and I'm not joking. I've written extensively about this. He said, "We're really sorry he said that to you. He didn't know that you're not a Jew." Right? And that's the kind of stuff, like, there were people in the audience that heard that and clapped. So, I mean, like that's the kind of stuff we're dealing with. And look, we're not going to change the haters. So I think when you're fighting haters, there's a way to fight when you're fighting, because like Meir said, these people are our enemies, right? And I think that if not now, and J Street and Bernie Farber and all those other idiots, they're just as dangerous to the Jews as anybody else, because I have people who are non-Jews tell me, well, Bernie Farber's Jewish and he's from antihate.ca and he says, so, and meanwhile, they're like, so what do you know? You're not even Jewish. And I'm like, well, dude, you don't have to be Jewish to have common sense.
Right. We've all heard the name Peter Beinart, for example. Peter Beinart. Okay. Yeah. All right. So let me just make a comment. Peter Beinart appeared on CNN 2 years ago, and it was after a terrorist attack in Israel. So Peter Beinart is there with two other members on CNN, two others sitting at the desk with him, neither Jewish. And Peter Beinart was to give his opinion, and Peter Beinart at the time believed in a two-state solution, which meant, of course, the creation of the state of Palestine. He's long deserted that. He only believes in a one-state solution, and it should be a confederation of Israel-Palestine with the vote going to the to the Arabs. Anyhow, Peter Beinart appears on CNN, and he prefaces, and I've seen him do this before, and the reason I'm bringing in Peter Beinart, as I'm looking at Meir Weinstein here, is Peter Beinart has been invited to hundreds of Jewish organizations in America to represent the Jewish perspective in Israel. Meir Weinstein has not been. Now, let me just tell you what Peter Beinart said. He actually began, it was almost a rehearsed, canned opening. He said, before I begin, I'd like the audience, and he points to the TV camera that's looking at him, I'd like the audience to know three things. One, I'm Jewish. Two, I attend synagogue regularly. And three, my children go to Jewish day school. No. Having said that, he continues, having said that, I fully understand why Arabs engage in terrorism against Jews, against Israelis. That was his opening. And the two non-Jews in the panel were in shock. This brazen attitude, which is the same reason, by the way, that he poses as an observant Jew. He's not, as others do. In Israel had a speaker of the Knesset, Avraham Berg, whose father Yosef Berg was the founder of the National Religious Party. He used to wear a kippah the size of an American or Canadian quarter. You could barely see it. Enough that he would justify, and he would go like this. He'd point because you couldn't see it, the quarter, and he goes, as a Jew, and then he'd vilify Israel. It was their license. It's like a black person. I'm a black, and I'm in favor of slavery. I have license to say this. The point that I'm trying to make is, and it's remarkable, we two Jews and one non-Jew, and I truly commend you. It's wonderful. We represent a minority of a minority of a minority. When I made reference to the Nazis knowing what they did, what they were doing and everything else, and other Nazis, other anti-Semites knowing what they were doing, the Arabs quite well know, they know what they're doing. There was one number that I should have mentioned. I mention it from time to time when the juxtaposition comes up, and that is the Jewish population of the world in 1939 was 16 million. The Jewish population of the world today is less than 16 million. It's 14.7 million. Now you're talking about 3 generations, if one is to count generations as 22 to 25 years, as anthropologists do. So in 3 generations of child rearing and such, we have fewer Jews today in the world than we had then. It's a
100%.
remarkable, it has to be understood. Just one last comment. I've said before, language is important.
There's a call coming through, a caller we have. Can I help you?
Yeah, I have a question for Meir Jolovitz.
Okay. What's your name, sir?
Tuvia.
Tuvia. Go ahead.
But he's still talking.
Yeah. You know what? Turn your volume down a little bit because there's a timing difference between what we have and what you have.
One moment here.
Okay.
So, Meir, here's the question. I'm just trying to lower down my volume here.
Okay.
You know, you guys are rambling on, which is great, and I understand why you're rambling on. You know, the issues are, look, I was kicked out of a synagogue, a local Asia Torah synagogue, a Bali Tshuva synagogue, because I wanted to pray to God for not wearing a mask. The reality is, every single kosher store in Toronto, I'm not allowed to go into because I'm not allowed. I wear a mask. Now, I have a feeling just by your laugh, you're vaccinated. Jewish
okay.
people
Yes, I am.
have
So,
all been vaccinated.
Okay. Jordan Gottlieb, thanks for calling. Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
Well, the moment that he used the word ramble, you know, I was lost. Okay. The point that I'm making, and I think we all subscribe to, is that those of us who understand what the real battle is it's a small minority. I've often said to some of my even right-wing friends who are somewhat more optimistic about things in the world, and I tell them, I scold them by saying that they live in a world that ought to be, and I live in the world that is.
Yep.
They seem to think that you can somehow educate hatred away. You can't. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to it, but it's not going to happen in our lifetime. It isn't as if after 2,000 years of Jewish exile, of 2,000 years of persecution, of 2,000 years of pogroms, which culminated in the worst of all, the greatest tragedy that befell man, the Holocaust, that all of a sudden, today, it's going to end. CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, it's going to end. It's not going to end. And I'm blessed in the sense that my grandchildren are yet young, but my children are exactly like-minded. They met my mother, who was a Holocaust survivor. My father passed away, but they live the reality of let me just throw this in. Sociologists and psychologists have often told us, and correctly so, that we are the products of our environment, the way we were raised, where we were raised, and everything else. And I'm speaking for myself, I'm an anomaly. I am not a product of my environment. I've lived a good life. My life, I've felt anti-Semitism. I live very much, I'm a product of my parents, of what happened to them, and the grandparents I didn't meet. And I dare not pretend that that wasn't real. We today, living in Canada or in the United States, live to a great degree in Disneyland. It's a fantasy world. We in America don't understand the Taliban. We in America don't understand Hamas. We in America don't understand that ISIS wasn't the group that invented beheadings. Okay? Yeah. Well, there were a couple of biblical cases. Muhammad beheaded more people than ISIS ever did. They don't understand that this is a religious conflict, that the problem with Jews, according to our enemies, isn't because of anything we've done or failed to do. It's because we exist.
Yeah, of course.
And that's let me just add something to that. You could pop back in.
No, please.
Just add something to that. That when Islamic Relief, for instance, when Islamic Relief Canada an Islamic organization and one of the largest in Canada, when they sponsor Bikers for Palestine, ride through the Jewish community, it's exactly what you said. This is a religious, this is not a nationalist, let's go after Israel. This is a religious element to it. It's an Islamic call to dismantle Israel.
Yeah.
Right. The argument I made.
Guys, you're not like Meir. I don't want. I'm sorry, Mayor Jolowitz. It's
No,
hard,
please,
Mayor
please.
and Mayor. So I don't. Maybe should I say Big Mayor and Little
We
Mayor?
like
I don't.
those names.
Yeah, it's a good name. It's a good. Hey,
It's
Mayor's
simple.
a good name, right? So, no. Okay, so like I'm not even disagreeing with that. But what I'm trying to say, like, look, I've studied Islam. I understand the danger of the ideology of Islam, and like you're seeing it in real time in Afghanistan right now. I mean, they're hanging people. They're grabbing women off the street. One woman was actually murdered. There was a thing on Twitter about it. There was a video of them murdering a woman because she wasn't wearing a hijab. Like, I'm aware of this stuff. And I need you to understand where I'm coming from. Look, I understand that Islam's a greater threat to me than it is to you because I'm an apostate. I left the Christian religion to return to my indigenous spirituality. And to a religious Muslim, that means I'm an apostate. That means that I don't even get the chance to convert. I get killed out of hand. So, and that's according to their fundamentals. That's not an extremist belief. That's their fundamental belief.
I don't want to get into a theological argument, but you're wrong there. The Jew in the Quran, the Jew is the specific enemy. The fact that it's the apostate, someone who has left Islam is destined for death, not someone who left another religion.
No, it's anyone. I'm going to disagree with you there because I have this direct actually from an imam. They look at anyone who follows the Bible. Now, that's the funny thing about how they see Jews, right? Anyone who follows the Bible or is of the Abrahamic faiths, all right, they lump them all together. Now, the thing is, they don't think that you're real Jews, right? That's their whole thing, is that supposedly the people that call themselves Jews now are not really Jews. That's how they can get around, like when they do their interfaith nonsense. They say, well, so-and-so is actually Jewish and so-and-so is not, right? Their whole thing is that the Jews that call themselves Jews now are not really Jews, and they've twisted the scripture. So this is like looking at it from the Islamic point of view, which is what they're doing.
But
they
you
don't
are
they're actually Jewish. Like when they say first the Saturday people and then the Sunday people, what they're saying is the Jews now, that like to them, and this is the thing that you have to understand, like look at it from their point of view. They can't come right out and say, we hate the Jews and we're going to kill them all. So what they say,
no. Ryan, you're wrong. They do say it.
Well, they do say it. They
Ryan,
say it in Arabic.
Ryan,
okay, first, you don't need to yell. You don't need to yell. I'm sitting right here.
I will send you 700 quotes where they say it.
Dude, Meir, you're preaching to the choir. What I'm saying is in Canada, they're very careful about what they say and how they say it. When they do say that stuff, they say it in Arabic. When they say it in their own Facebook groups where there's no media. And I know about this stuff. I've seen it. I used to do these investigations for a certain Jewish organization. Trust me, I know. They do say this stuff, and they say it quite often, generally in Arabic spaces and places where they're not going to get called out. So, like, what I'm trying to say is that the Muslims themselves, look, the average Muslim in Canada, most Muslims in the Middle East don't even see them as Muslims. I know Muslims that drink beer. If a religious Muslim finds out that a Muslim's drinking alcohol, they immediately say, well, that person's not Muslim. So, I mean, like, we're talking about Islam and the ideology. So, like, the ideology in this crazy nonsense that's going on in Afghanistan, that's not, we're all using words like extreme. It's not extreme to a Muslim, right?
Correct.
To a Muslim, that's to an actual religious Muslim. The reason that most people in Afghanistan said they would like to see Sharia law is because to a religious Muslim, Sharia law is normal. To you and me, we look at Sharia law and we're like, okay, that's some crazy nonsense.
Ryan, I have to take you to task. You're completely wrong about the Quran. It does identify the Jew. Ryan. The Jew betrayed, this is them. The Jew betrayed Muhammad. The Jew is destined to death. Muhammad, it is chapter and verse. What you're confusing with, Ryan, is the fact that they claim their claim to, for example, the Temple Mount they claimed that there was no Jewish presence in the Temple Mount. Never mind that the mosque, both the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa, were built on the ruins of.
Meir, the actual Quran never mentions the Temple Mount at all. It talks about the farthest
No. I know. I'm talking about today. The argument that you confuse with.
Oh no. Okay, so I'm not talking about today. I'm talking about literally the beginning, the advent of Islam. Yeah, you can talk about how like Muhammad was betrayed by the Jews. That's the modern day Muslims. When you talk to them, they will come right out and they will say that the Jews of today that are living in Israel are not real Jews.
That's not true. That's not true. And by the way, the Jews rejected Muhammad, and therefore they were. And later, when everything was written, not only Quran, the Hadith, it was because it targeted the Jew. It's so no different.
How do you think imams justify doing all the interfaith stuff to their own congregations? What do you think they tell them?
Yeah, there's one word: taqiyya.
Okay,
there's the answer.
Okay.
Taqiyya.
Look, dude. I'm not even saying that taqiyya is not a real thing. I know that it exists, but not every single thing is taqiyya.
When you have
a group of Muslims in the West, okay, you have to understand this too. I'm not an Islamic apologist by any stretch. Okay, I call this shit out all the time. When you have a group of Muslims, okay, and the imam is telling them, I'm doing this interfaith stuff with a Christian and with a Jew, they come right out and say, okay, these Jews are okay. Like, it's not like Islam comes right out and says in public spaces in the West that they're going to kill all the Jews. You and I both know that Islam has a very, very direct approach when it comes to proselytizing. In other words, when they take over a country, when they're a majority. Once the majority, it's no longer a choice to convert. You either convert or you become a dhimmi or you're killed. Now, what I'm saying is that they're a minority here. What they do and how they talk is very different. So now what they do is they say the Jews are not the real Jews. The Jews
fraudulent. It's fraudulent.
I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying
no. I'm not arguing that it's fraudulent that we are the real Jews. It's fraudulent to suggest that they don't believe that. They know who we are. We are the enemy. Their religion tells them that we are the enemy.
I wish it was that simple. It's really not that simple.
I
wish it was.
Here's where you and I might differ. When I lecture extensively, I often throw in the sentence that contrary to all other experts who talk about Middle East affairs and they talk about the conflict, the geostrategic, the territories and everything else, they all say that the most frequent answer you hear from an expert in the Middle East is the following, to whatever the question might be. Well, it's actually complicated. That's the answer you hear. It's actually complicated. My answer is there is nothing whatsoever that is complicated about it. It is the most simple of all conflicts in the world ever to understand.
Yeah.
There's nothing complicated about it.
Look, Meir, the thing is, I'm not saying that they're not trying to dominate the Middle East. They want to dominate the world. They're very clear. The ideology says any land that used to be Muslim must be Muslim forever. I'm not arguing against that. What I'm saying literally is that when they talk, especially in the West, they have to justify things because most of the Muslims, look, back in the old day, the Fellahin, they were ignorant. There was people in the villages could not, I'll let you in a second, Meir. They could not read. So there was only one guy in the village that could read. Most of them were ignorant peasants. And I'm not saying that to be mean. That's just the truth. So when you have a group of people who can't read and can't dispute anything, which is very different from Jews because Jews can all read so that you can argue about the Torah. You can't read the Torah. You can't argue about it. So now all of a sudden you have these two very different cultures. Now they come to the West, they learn how to read, and suddenly these same people, they're not completely ignorant anymore. Now they have social media. They have people asking questions. Now all of a sudden you can't just say we need to kill all the Jews and kill all the Christians. Now
they lie.
I know, but now they have to have reasons, right? They have to have justifications.
They lie.
So I'm saying what happens is they say stuff like those aren't the real Jews. You and I know that's bullshit, but the problem is the average Muslim might not know that that's bullshit. Sorry, and go ahead, Aaron.
Let me just jump in for a second. And we're going to show, we'll continue talking about this, but we have a short video clip to show about the Taliban. But I just want to say that Islamic Relief Canada has these dialogues with rabbis and Jewish leaders, and they're the ones responsible for this Bikers for Palestine. And they have leaders that have said inflammatory, that have called for an intifada. What's an intifada? So, you know, all this dialogue and debate, and it's complicated and all that. You know, like I said, what the Parsha says, when you go to war against your enemy, there's Jonathan Pollard. He said, perhaps somebody in a three-piece suit with a college degree or a law degree or whatever in North America is more dangerous than a Hamas person with a gun. They sweet talk you. They're with the woke movement, the progressive movement. Everything is legitimized, and they want the end of Israel. And it's true, they're involved in Holocaust. No, they're involved with anything to achieve their end goal, which is the obliteration of Israel. That's it.
Let's go a little bit from the Taliban, so take a break.
Whether it means to say that we're Khazars and converts and not real Jews, and then we are Jews, and we're it's really those Jews, the settler Jews, but by the way, Israel is a complete settler state according to them. So we're all settlers, and then we're all not Jewish. The bottom line, they want to wipe us out. We have a video to show.
A little break. So they say when you have two Jews together, you have three opinions. I guess when you have four Zionists together, you have like four opinions. But
video or the website, the live.
Yeah, call back in a few minutes. We're showing a video.
Taliban were founded in the early following the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Afghanistan. Initially based in Pakistan, the group quickly expanded its influence through Afghanistan.
And the thing has been in
1996, it seized the capital, Kabul, overthrowing the government, and by 1998, it controlled over 90% of the country. The Taliban preached a hardline form of Sunni Islam and Sharia law. Men were forced to grow beards and women to wear burqas. Cinema and music were banned, and girls prevented from going to school. Public floggings, amputations, and executions were also legion. After the 2001 World Trade Center attacks, the Taliban were accused of providing sanctuary for Al-Qaeda's Osama bin Laden, and in October of that year, a US-led military coalition invaded Afghanistan. By December 2001, the Taliban regime had collapsed, yet many senior figures managed to escape and seek refuge in neighboring Pakistan. Over the next decade, the group continued to carry out attacks in Afghanistan despite several leadership changes, and in 2016 it recaptured its first provincial capital, the strategic city of Kunduz. The Taliban also ramped up their diplomatic efforts and entered direct negotiations with the US for the first time in 2018. The talks culminated in a February 2020 peace deal between the two sides, but the agreement failed to curb the violence as Taliban fighters launched a series of targeted assassinations against judges, journalists, and activists. After Joe Biden announced the complete withdrawal of US troops in April 2021, the group began seizing large swathes of territory while encountering little resistance from the Afghan military. In August 2021, the Taliban recaptured Kabul, nearly 20 years after they were last ousted from the capital.
You're gonna go
Will not conduct a hasty rush to the exit. We'll do it responsibly, deliberately, and safely.
Is a Taliban takeover of Afghanistan now inevitable?
No, it is not.
Do you see any parallels between this withdrawal and what happened in Vietnam with some people feeling?
None whatsoever. Zero. There's going to be no circumstance where you see people being lifted off the roof of an embassy of the United States from Afghanistan. It is not at all comfortable. The likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
Don't you bear some responsibility for the outcome? The Taliban ends up back in control and women end up losing the rights.
No, I don't. Do I bear responsibility? Zero responsibility. We'll not conduct a hasty rush to the exit. We'll do it.
And what we get to see here is a nice comparison between Vietnam and Afghanistan. Meir, I'll give it back to you.
Yeah, you know, it's unbelievable. These are historic times. There's no question about it. What we're witnessing today is history, and it's a disaster. And when the Biden administration embraces Jews who hate Israel, and J Street and the progressive left and Bernie Sanders, et cetera, and then puts in positions of power people who are pro-Iran, pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah, pro-BDS, and he's going to be meeting with the Prime Minister of Israel in, I think, just over a week to try and pressure Israel and convince Israel that Joe Biden has Israel's back. Give me a break. The Jewish community better wake up. And
it's insane. I can't understand how anybody can take Biden seriously when he says, you know, like the U.S. will always have Israel's back. I'm kind of like, well, like you had the Kurds, like you had, you know, like the Vietnamese, the Hmong tribesmen. How many allies have they abandoned outright? So
no question.
I mean, it's just, it's absolutely insane. And this is the same guy that expects us to believe him when he says, oh yeah, we'll make sure that Iran doesn't mess with Israel. Yeah,
we have a short clip. We have a short clip of a Hamas, I think the second most powerful person in Hamas, congratulating the Taliban with some background of who this individual is, and we can discuss it.
I'll get that right on. And it's important to realize this is the #2 man in Hamas. I mean, he's a multi-billionaire. He was in prison in America when they wanted to deport him out of America. No Arab country would take him. We negotiated, and finally Jordan accepted him due to some negotiations. But here's just a quick little video, which I think you might all enjoy. So basically, Mr. Marzouk is the #2 man who congratulated Taliban in a barbaric takeover of the people of Afghanistan. He said, quote, they were not deceived by the slogans of democracy in elections and fake promises. They'd rather imprison women, you know, take 11-year-olds as sex slaves for the soldiers. But of course, he ties it right into Hamas and the Taliban, this beautiful relationship of birds of a feather flocking together. So who is this guy, Marzouk? Again, the #2 man. That's very important to remember, that he's not low down in totem pole. He has lots of names depending on what your sources you're looking at. And he managed to get his master's degree and his doctorate in the Zionist colonized country of America. So he came here for his education to this terrible country. That's interesting. So back in 1995, he's designated as a terrorist, and he's been designated as such ever since. And once again, as I had mentioned, when we wanted to deport him after he spent a couple of years in jail, that wasn't an easy task. He is among the wealthiest billionaires of Hamas, with somewhere between $2 and $3 billion, while the Palestinians starve. There he is in his bright orange outfit. I think that's a good uniform for him. After his arrest, imprisonment, and deportation in the 90s, numerous Arab countries refused his transfer. That's kind of interesting. After significant pressure and negotiating, he was reluctantly accepted by Jordan. Then he went to Egypt, then to Pakistan, then pretty much wherever he wanted to go. Remember, he's referred to as the #2 man in Hamas. So I look up, what does that mean, the #2 man? So I went to the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And if you look it up, what #2 means is solid waste from the body, feces, and excrement. So that's personally a very good designation for this guy. And thus, the #2 man is Musa. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Sometimes, you know, you just got to go with your inclinations. So again, the birds of a feather, Iran with the Muslim Brotherhood. We've got Hamas with the Taliban. And of course, not to forget the friendly relationship between Iran and Hezbollah. But it's sad that when you think about it, this isn't new. History does sadly repeat itself. This has been going on for 75 years and probably more like a few thousand years.
In Berlin, wie in anderen
Look back in Germany in 1933.
Deutsche und unsittliche Bücher von den Studenten eingesammelt und öffentlich verbrannt.
We fast forward to 2021 in Israel. And why are they allowed to get away with this? That's obviously the big question of the day. I think it was best said by Rabbi Kahane, who prefers a powerful and proud Jewish state that's hated by the entire world, as opposed to an Auschwitz as loved by one and all. Join us, and now, Meir, I'm sending it back to you.
Yeah, it's unbelievable what's going on. So we see complete mishandling by the Biden administration. We know what kind of people that he's bringing into his administration that he has appointed who are very anti-Israel. And Anthony Blinken, give me a break compared to what they had, who he replaced. It's more of John Kerry. We have a call coming, so let's just take it. Hello, you're on.
Hi, it's Renana Gaminer again.
Hi, Renana.
Hi.
You're on.
So I was the same question for Mr. Zlotowicz.
Okay, for Mayor Jolovitz. Go ahead. Yes.
It seems to me that the Arabs got into Israel largely by jihad, flooding in the last 100 years illegally. And is that not the same jihad that's continuing now when they just received permission for all these illegal houses in Area C? And why is even the Orthodox community quiet when we read about the responsibilities to our land every week?
Go ahead, Mayor.
What she's referring to is the fact that the Bennett government agreed that Israel would recognize 1,000 new housing entities in exchange for Israel reducing the number that it wanted to, that had planned housing units from 3,000. Israel moved theirs down to 2,000. What wasn't mentioned at all in much of what you read this week was the fact that over the last 30 years in Israel, there have been over, now I'm going to say this slowly so it doesn't seem, between 60,000 and 90,000 illegal housing units built by Arabs throughout Israel. As part of the coalition government, which is now a government that leans strongly left, one of the conditions was that the Bedouins, who've never had permanent enclaves as homes, by their definition, by their nature, it's axiomatic that Bedouins travel, they have tents and everything else. Israel agreed to allow 10,000 to 11,000 Bedouin structures to be built in the Negev. What does that mean? That they're going to claim land, because those structures aren't going to be temporary tents, which are torn down as they travel as nomads, but they're going to be permanent. So the issue isn't just the destructive policy of the Israeli government now that's actually going to recognize 1,000 Arab housing units that they weren't going to. It's that nothing is being done, not in the high courts as well, which are viciously left in Israel, to the 60 to 90,000 When the Arabs are confronted with this fact, what do they say? That's a lie. We only have 30,000. That's what they say. We only have 30,000 illegal housing units. Why they stand is the question that needs to be asked. And the answer is, it's Israel's fault. Last year, the Supreme Court handled the case of 13 illegally built Israeli housing units. And the Supreme Court in Israel said that they've got to come down, and said that there would be future investigations of possibly 100 more illegal settlements, illegal housing units built in Israel. So where Israel the Jews have to fight for the 100 or so illegal housing units that they've built, the Arabs get away with 60 to 90,000. Israel is a nation that has lost its soul and its mind. And they do so because they want to placate the Western world. They want to placate the Arab world. It's interesting. We talked about this newfound relations between Israel and the Abrahamic Accords, which is by the way, that name, it's an obscene name to give to that so-called peace agreement, because part of the agreement suggested that Israel would not declare its sovereignty and expand to claim the very areas where Abraham indeed occupied. Hebron was Jewish 4,000 years ago. Tel Aviv wasn't Jewish in 1908. It didn't exist. Tel Aviv was built in 1909. And yet the average Israeli, the average American Jew, the average professor believes that Israel might have a right to Tel Aviv, which is a joke, but they don't have a right to Hebron. The problem is ours. We have lost the argument. We've lost the argument, we've lost language, we've lost the narrative, and we are losing the debate. We refuse to recognize that Israel has an implacable enemy. Implacable enemy. It's not going, when my grandchildren are old enough to make the case that I'm making today, they will make the same case. The Arabs, by virtue of their culture, ideology, and their religion, cannot recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state in the Middle East. Zionism is nothing more and nothing less than the Jewish national liberation movement. And it flies in the face of Islam and the whole pan-Arabic experience.
Yep.
They are mutually exclusive ideologies. If one survives, the other cannot. It's that simple, unless one of them decides to change. And therefore, we have the Peter Beinarts. Peter Beinart will define and say, well, Zionism, we've accomplished the Zionist Zionist plan. The Zionist plan was to establish the state of Israel. We did that in 1948. And now it's time to move on. The one question and there are many questions, but one question that one needs to ask when one discusses territories, everyone says, AIPAC, American Israel Public Affairs Committee, calls this an issue of territories, that they believe in a two-state solution. And a very simple question needs to be asked. If it's about territory and it's about Israel's occupation, their word, not mine, why was there no peace in 1966? Israel occupied, their word, the territories in 1967. Why was there no peace in 1966 or 1948? The answer is quite obvious. That for them, occupation is Tel Aviv. Israel proper to them is occupation. And our side, wanting to show the world that we can be so benevolent, buys into their argument. And we argue and we argue and we discuss and we debate on their terms rather than our terms. And that's who we are.
Meir, I will say this. Like, you know how they quoted Meir Kahane there just before you started talking, you know, of how he would rather see a powerful Israel that's hated and feared. The problem is that you're hated and feared and you're not really demonstrating any kind of power right now. Like, if you take a look, like we've talked, Meir Weinstein and I have talked about this ad nauseum. I mean, the fact is, it's the Jewish ancestral heartland that's in question right now. I mean, most Jews even don't even realize that the Temple Mount is actually over what they call the Green Line. So I agree. Like we don't fight. Like when we're arguing here, and we should be arguing because there's lots to argue about. We're not arguing properly. We're not actually saying, okay, here, if it's a spectrum, right? At 1 is one end of the spectrum, at 10 is the other end of the spectrum. All of our advocates generally argue right around 4 and 5, and all of their arguments are right around 9 and 10. Like 10 being we should kill all the Jews and push them in the sea, 9 being we should just destroy Israel, right? Our guys are always trying to meet them closer to the middle, but the problem is that moves the middle. I agree. We do need to start arguing that, look, the idea of Jews living on their ancestral land is an anathema to the Muslims, because the Muslims just basically say we should be in control of everything. And the fact that there's a tiny little Jewish state that consists of less than 1% of the landmass is a thorn in their side, right? But I think that part of the problem is that the Israelis themselves have been so terrible at advocating for themselves. Like, they don't come right out and say, screw you, that's our land. Instead, they'll do the whole thing with the Sheikh Jarrah, and they even the Israelis call it Sheikh Jarrah when they should be calling it Shimon HaTzedek, because the neighborhood is Shimon HaTzedek. It's his tomb is right there, for God's sake. It's Jews that own that land, and yet the Israeli Supreme Court keeps saying, well, how about this? Why don't we'll make a concession and we'll let them stay there, and they only have to pay $40 a month for rent. Meanwhile, Jews have had those leases since the 1800s. Those are Jewish-owned homes.
Let me jump in for a second. I remember in the early 80s, Miriam Levinger, and she started the Jews living in Hebron, in fact, when they returned. She started the whole thing. With her husband led the Gushimim, and she started a group of women that stayed in Hebron, and eventually there was some construction that took place. I remember an interview she had with Life magazine in the early 80s, and she said what her vision was for Hebron, that the Jewish community would really thrive and be built up, and there would be hotels and malls and just so much, because it's supposed to be the second holiest city to the Jewish people. And why wouldn't Hebron be built up? And when I go back to Hebron and I see there's no change. There's hardly any change. It's an embarrassment.
By the way,
people, what is going on in Hebron? Meir, jump in. You've seen
by
it.
the way, it was Rabbi Kahana. It was Miriam and Moshe, and Rabbi Kahana said always said, he said it then, he said it, he said she was the real heroine. Moshe Levinger followed his wife. She was the real heroine. But I want to tell you something. And I mean, Ryan, I respect you, I appreciate you, and I love you. But when you said we should be arguing, I'm going to parse that. I'm going to say there's nothing to argue about. There's nothing to argue about. Now, I understand that they have their opinions, and 70% of the Israelis don't believe we should be in the territories. Never mind that the right wing in Israel, outnumbers the left wing.
Renata, one moment. You'll ask your question in a moment, Renata. Go ahead, Meir.
Even though the right wing in Israel outnumbers the left wing as far as political proclivity by a significant number, almost 7-1, is the Israelis have an attitude. The Hebrew words are nimasli, nimaslanu, which means enough already, just enough. And they just look, let's just give them a piece. You know what? Let's just cut the baby and give them the baby. Enough. And as Rabbi Kahana would have said, there's nothing to discuss. There's nothing to argue. There's nothing to argue about. Who am I going to argue with? Some leftist living in Ramat Aviv? Who am I going to argue with? It is crystal clear. There are no two sides to the story. There's only one side to the story.
I agree with you, Meir, but I'm going to say this, okay? When you don't argue, you end up with nonsense like the Mohammed Dura nonsense, where Israel never fought it. They never said, hey, wait a minute, that's absolute BS. They had evidence. They showed with German ballistics experts that it couldn't have been Israelis that killed him. And yet the Israelis are like, well, it's nothing big is going to happen.
Who were they showing it to? They were showing it to the kangaroo court. Stop it. They were showing it to the kangaroo court. It's like me.
To the world, though. Like, Meir, if you don't argue, then the other side automatically thinks that they won.
No.
And the average person watching is like, they're not arguing because they don't have an argument. That's why you have to fight this stuff. I mean, there's this whole idea that you don't fight and you don't argue. That's what the Federation is trying to sell us.
I'm not suggesting you don't argue in making your case. You make your case and tell them to go to hell. Wait, I want to make...
I'm okay with that.
Wait. An important point. I'm going to cite Rabbi Kahana again. Rabbi Kahana was watching television in the United States, and he saw a debate between a very articulate Abba Ibn, who spoke, as Rabbi Kahana used to say about Abba Ibn, Rabbi Kahana used to say, he speaks 12 languages brilliantly. The problem is he speaks all 12 at the same time. That's what he said. Anyhow, Abba Ibn appears on television, and across the desk from Abba Ibn is some Arab who was not articulate like Edward Said was, just an inarticulate Arab. And they were arguing about land. And Abba Ibn basically said about the land, about territory, this is post-1967, he said, whoa, why are we fighting? Let's sit down, negotiate. You take what's yours and we'll keep what's ours, and we'll resolve this peacefully. The Arab, who wasn't articulate at all, said, no, there's nothing to discuss, ... Rabbi Kahana said, imagine that you're a farmer in Kansas. I mean, I'm actually quoting him. Imagine that you're a farmer in Kansas.
I remember it.
You know nothing about the Middle East, but you know everything about land. And you have these two people arguing about land that you don't know where it is on the map. One of them says, well, let's divide it somehow, like King Solomon. You can see where I'm going with this. And the other says, no, it's mine. And the person who says, no, it's mine, is the Arab. And Kahana concludes, and rightly so, that the farmer in Kansas who knows nothing about the Middle East, but knows everything about land, says, I believe it belongs to the Arab, because he's not willing to give up something that's his, whereas the Jew is willing to negotiate it. And so Rabbi Kahana said, anyone with common sense, not knowing anything about the dynamics of the history, the territories, the lines, will say, based on that, using the King Solomon parable, the Arab was the one who didn't want to divide the baby. King Solomon, the Arab. And Kahana said, the farmer in Kansas believes that the land belongs to the Arab.
Well, I think part of the problem too, though, is that Abba Ibn didn't come right out and say, like, look, I'm going to be honest. I think Abba Ibn was actually a brilliant speaker. A lot of the stuff
He was a brilliant speaker. He said the wrong things.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes
Abba Ibn was
lots of Jews do, because I'm going to tell you this. One of the biggest problems when you guys talk about this whole thing, if you tell me God gave it to me so it's mine, if I don't believe in the same God as you, I don't give a shit what your God tells you.
And now, I don't give a shit what you think.
Exactly, but I'm telling you, this is what the average person, if you're not religious, the religious argument doesn't hold any weight.
I'm not trying to win over converts and MSNBC who logic doesn't, wait a second, Ryan, logic doesn't prevail. Is logic on our side? Yes.
You know what? Yeah, I know. And that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that if we are going to win ever, what we need to do is use proper language when we're talking about this. We need to be cognizant that people are watching. Look, I'm not going to win over Peter Beinart. I know that. But there's a shitload of people that watch these things and say to themselves, okay, this guy has a better point than that guy.
I'm not arguing that. I'm not arguing that we don't. I'm not arguing we sit silent.
That's what this comes across as when you say we shouldn't argue. There's no argument. I think we're right.
No.
We're wrong.
You said
that if we don't do it properly.
I was making reference to the fact that you said we should argue among ourselves about Torah.
You know what?
Torah is not to be argued with.
We have to argue. Listen, if we you know that whole thing to the choir? We don't have a choir. We have a whole shitload of people singing their wrong. That's a problem. So when I'm talking about when I'm talking about Israel and Jews and Judaism and why it's important for Jews to be Jewish, it's also important for us to define those terms.
What was
you guys
the
are the ones that created arguing, right? So what I'm saying, in our own spaces, we have these conversations, we have these arguments in our own spaces, so that when we are confronting the people that hate Jews, we are actually united in the terms that we're using and our talking points, so that we're not having a problem where Ryan says one thing about how the Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel. Meanwhile, I have another guy that says, well, no, we're from Iraq because Abraham was from Ur.
And you think we as the minority are going to convince the majority to use the language which we adopt. By the way, when you mentioned
Meir, hang on. No. Okay, because you want to know something? We are using that language. When I started doing this 10 years ago, there wasn't a single person using the word indigenous in this sphere. There wasn't a single person that used the terms ancestral heartland, ancestral homeland when they were talking about Judea and Samaria. They didn't use that language because it sounded too lefty and it was kind of scary. People are using that language now, and not only are they using it, they're using it correctly, and they're turning the Arabs away when the Arabs try to say, I've lived there for thousands and thousands of years. It's like, okay, but you're not indigenous. That's not your indigenous homeland.
Hold on. You mentioned Abba Eban. In 1967, Abba Eban was a brilliant, erudite voice on behalf of Israel. In the last years of his life, he used that same brilliant command of language to support a PLO. So let's wake up to facts, and I don't care how articulate he is. I'd rather have a taxi cab driver from Tel Aviv who says Hebron is mine than Abba Eban in the most eloquent, I need a thesaurus to find out when he says no, it's not. So let's use language where it needs to be, but let's recognize that language can be used against us. One other point, just one other point. There were 7 resolutions on December 23rd, 2019. There were 7 resolutions which were passed in the United Nations condemning Israel in one day. 7.
Yeah.
What were the so-called friends of Israel, the Frances, the England, what was the average, because they were all a little different, what was the average voice, the average vote? Oh, there it is. Thank you. Abba Eban is making my case. There it is. He's making my case. What was the average vote a year and a half ago in the United Nations among the enlightened nations of Europe on issues condemning Israel? The average vote was 123 to 11. 123 to 11.
You're not saying anything that I disagree with when you
say
that.
Yes, I am saying something. I'm saying something. I'll tell you what I'm saying.
Okay.
We are right. The truth is on our side. We're logical. It doesn't matter, Ryan. They vote against us.
It doesn't change. You,
Ryan, in the votes at the United Nations post-Abrahamic Accords, where has it, and you know where I'm going with this, where has the UAE voted? Where has Sudan voted? Where has Bahrain voted? You know the answer, but I'll let the audience know. Every single one of them voted against Israel. Wake up.
Look, I don't disagree with you with that at all. Look, I think maybe you might be misinterpreting my position. I'm about as pro-Israel and pro-Jewish identity a person you'll ever find that's not Jewish. Okay. I know I'm not stupid or naive. I also know that the U.S. is not as pro-Israel as they like to believe. Canada is definitely not as pro-Israel as we were under Harper. I'm not operating under any illusions. Yeah, I'm not operating under any illusions. What I'm saying, though, is that if we just give up and we don't fight these arguments with better arguments, it'll be even worse. Because
I didn't say not to fight. I've never
I know you're not saying not to fight.
Not to fight.
I know you're not saying not to fight. What I'm saying, though, is that's how it sounds when you say, what's the point in arguing? What I'm saying is, I don't argue for myself, and I don't argue for people like you or Meir Weinstein. Meir Weinstein knows just as much, if not more, than me about this nonsense. He knows way more about a lot of this shit. He's fought actual Nazis. But lots of people that follow me on social media don't. Lots of average Canadians, they've never even met a Jew. So what I'm saying is we need to make good arguments. We need to use precise language. Abba Eban, it's sad what he, and look, this happens lots with people in their later years. They start saying lots of nonsensical stuff. Nathan Sharansky defended a woman singing at a thing in Vancouver, that Aham Nini lady, when she was talking about singing at a terrorist funeral, and then they brought her in to speak at sing at a Yom Ha'atzmaut event in Vancouver. Like, and Nathan Sharansky was like, I don't think it's a big deal. And he's one of my heroes, but I still called him out for that, because you don't let people who are supporting terrorists sing at an Israeli thing. I'm sorry, like, I'm just not down with that. Like, sacred cows make the best hamburgers, so I will call that kind of shit out. But at the same time, I think we need to, as a group, as pro-Israel, as Zionists, we need to have these kinds of arguments and conversations in our own spaces, so that when we are confronting other idiots, because those people are idiots, we need to be on the same page. We need to say the same things. They have one argument, Meir. They only have one argument, and it's a compelling one, because they believe it so strongly. Jews are bad. That's their baseline argument. That's their argument behind everything. And they say it with conviction.
I'll speak one more sentence. You just said, and I'm quoting you, we need to be on the same page. I wholeheartedly agree. And I add this, and we will never, ever, ever be.
Yeah. Sadly, I think you might be right, because I like everyone, whenever I argue about the importance of, being on the same page, people always say, well, what about the big tent? And I always tell them, you know what? I'm an Indian. I live in a teepee sometimes, right? So I don't let people in the teepee when they're trying to burn down the teepee. They can stay the hell outside.
Yeah.
So I'm not such a big fan of the big tent.
I remember when Rabbi Kahana, when he was alive, and he would speak on campus, and there were all kinds of Arab groups to try and shut him down, joined by liberal Jews, to try and shut him down and call him a Nazi and every word in the book. So Rabbi Kahane is not with us anymore, but now you see people like Michael Oren, Ehud Olmert could speak on a campus, and they will try and shut him down and call him the same thing.
Yep.
It's got nothing to do with whether Jews compromise, in quotes, any aspect of the land, anything. If we claim 1 square inch of Israel, that will not satisfy them. And anyways, and by the way, we're the ones in the right. And when I cited Miriam Levinger, and I've been to Hebron, and by the way, my first experience with Hebron was when I went to Israel in 1980 as a student to go to yeshiva. And so I had plans. Rabbi Kahana arranged it that I was going to spend my first Shabbat in Kiryat Arba and walk in Friday night with other yeshiva students that were staying over there in Kiryat Arba, walk in, make kiddush for the women who are there, Miriam Levinger and other women Friday night, and then walk back to where we're going to stay. It ends up that Rabbi Kahana I spoke to him when I got off the plane in Israel, but shortly after that, he was arrested. And I couldn't find out who I was going to be staying with for that Shabbat. I made every single effort. I went to his office on Shishkin Street at the time, and nobody knew who or what. And they said I was the last guy who spoke with Rabbi Kahana before he was arrested. So I stayed in Jerusalem at a friend's place. He was at Aish Torah at the time. Make a long story short, word traveled that Shabbat that the Jews who went to Hebron that Friday night to make kiddush for the women, that they were massacred. They were machine gunned down, grenades were thrown at them. I believe that was May 2nd, 1980. And,
Aaron Gross.
Yes. And there was a yeshiva student from Montreal also that was with the group as well. So, but when I remember Miriam Levinger and her interview, and the Arabs then, after the Jews were massacred, were giving out candies and sweets and celebrating. So when I reflect on the interview with Miriam Levinger, that Hebron needs to be built up, and the Jewish community must be enlarged and beautified, and malls and housing and everything that should really normally be for not just a Jewish community outside of Israel, but because it's in Israel and in Hebron, it should thrive. And what we see today is a desecration, and that every single administration in Israel has been chicken shit. And it's an absolute horror. When we go to Hebron and we pray at the Tomb of the Patriarchs, and we experience, and it's unbelievable, the experience, a leaking roof, and facilities are not really that nice there. We endure it all. And they're even talking about to make it more accessible for disabled people. After all these years, we still have that debate. Where's the Jewish pride?
Arabs are freaking out. The Arabs are freaking out because you want to build a ramp for people with wheelchairs.
Yeah, well, you know what? Let them freak out and let them feel the fear of the Jewish God.
Meir, that's exactly it. The reason is, in a sentence and half a sentence, we have an Israeli government, not a Jewish government.
Right. And there's a major difference there in terms of an Israeli identity versus a Jewish identity. We want a Jewish state. An Israeli state could be come see, come saw. It could be even like an Arab Israeli, Muslim Israeli state that could wave the Palestine flag. When the riots were going on, they raised the Palestine flag on Har Bayit.
Yeah.
Where is the pride?
Yeah.
Where's the pride?
No, I agree. I think that
here's the faith. Every single year, all the high holidays, Pesach, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we all say next year in Jerusalem, and it's supposed to be so dear to us. And on Tisha B'Av, when we weep over the destruction of the temples and everything else that happened on that day, and Hebron is not built up, it's an obscenity. When we look at this Ben and Jerry's and pathetic guys that were born Jewish and spit on Israel and embrace the BDS and give funding to Badil and those who want to kill us, and we don't build up Hebron.
Well, I'll tell you, Meir,
Bernie Sanders is we build it up because that's Judaism. That's just normal Judaism.
You know, Meir, I remember you posted something about on Tisha B'Av. I thought, like, look, I'm not Jewish, right? But one of the most saddening things for me, it was actually saddening. It hurt me to see this. Jews were denied even the option to go up on the Temple Mount, and Arabs were actually not just gloating, but they were saying, like, you know, this proves that we've won, because the Jews are afraid to go to their most sacred and holy place on a day when they're supposed to be there. And I like, to this day, I still don't even understand, like, this whole way that you guys aren't even allowed to go to your most sacred place after you've achieved self-determination on your ancestral land. Anytime you guys go to the Temple Mount, it turns into, oh, well, now the Arabs are going to have a riot. Like, it's an absolute insanity, and it's something I will never understand.
Go for a walk through Shar Shechem on the way to the Kotel, and you see Arab shops there or Muslim shops there that have pictures of what they consider to be martyrs. Shut it down. Yeah. That's incitement.
Yeah, but you know what they shut down instead? They shut down the Jerusalem Day March because there's a few idiots chanting something stupid after being taunted by Arabs. I went to that march 3 years in a row with Ari Fuld.
Yep.
I saw it firsthand. I couldn't believe the fact that people were saying, oh, you know, the Jews are saying horrible things. I was there the whole day one day, and I said, I want to see video of these chants you're talking about, because I was sitting at Stabby Gate there, Damascus Gate. I sat there the whole day for 8 hours. I never saw one Jew freaking out at the Arabs, but I saw Arabs taunting the Jews there the entire time. Yep. So, yeah, I get a little bit pissed off when I see that stuff, too.
Yep. Absolutely. Meir, you've seen it all, too.
Yes, I have. But I recall that wonderful.
It's 2 minutes, okay?
But I recall that wonderful.
Talk as long as we want, but I think that our audience numbers are kind of plateauing. So why don't we start with Meir Jolovitz, 2 minutes. And at the end of all of this, I do have a song of the week. So we need to leave time for that. It's not very long. So Jolovitz, take it away. You got 2 minutes.
Here, let me do this. I printed this. You might even hear me do this again if I'm invited back.
Of course.
Maurice Samuels wrote a book called You Gentiles in 1924. He was a prolific Jewish author who wrote about the fact that the Jews were called on to be a moral people and a guide to the way that others should live with no expectations that they would ever follow. And on the last page of that book, I'm not going to read it all. It would take a little more than my 2 minutes. Is the last page was called A Last Word. And he includes this little paragraph in it. And he says at the very end of the book, I believe that though I might have erred here and there, I've been mainly right. And I console myself with the thought that if this book offends by its assertiveness, God knows that the infinite tactfulness of thousands of other Jews seems to have offended no less. Whatever we do, we are damned. And I would rather be damned standing up than lying down. Maurice Samuels, 1924.
Wow.
Ryan, take it away.
I think that, look, at the end of the day, both mayors and I have a lot more that we agree on than disagree. I think that that's the most important thing to realize. Like, I think for me, the biggest thing is that I think we need to make sure that people understand what Zionism actually means, that we stop letting these idiots like Boehner tell people they're Zionists. You either believe in the right of Jews to have self-determination on their ancestral land, you believe in the right of Jews to live anywhere on those lands free from persecution and oppression, or you don't. That, to me, is the bottom line. That should be the baseline. And look, I'm annoyed that we have to even have these conversations anymore. It does piss me off. Whenever somebody tries to tell me, like, do you believe that Israel should exist? I don't even bother having that argument. It's a stupid argument. Then I'll tell them point blank, you're an idiot for even asking that kind of question. But at the same time, I believe strongly that we need to push back against these idiots. We need to push back against these people that want to ride bikes through a Jewish neighborhood and chant Free Palestine. Like, are you kidding me? That's so overtly anti-Semitic. I can't even, that makes no sense. Okay, well, by the same token, why don't you ride your bike by the Israeli embassy, right? That would make more sense than riding it through a Jewish neighborhood in Toronto. But if they're going to do something like that, I think there needs to be an organization that will stand up, that will get enough people to go stand there. And I would have them stand across the road from house to house. There'd be no room for them to ride their stupid bikes. They can turn their ass around and ride their bike the hell out of there. And that's it. That's if you don't give them a physics lesson on the way out. That's how I feel about it. Right. And look, and I agree with you 100%. You know what? I've always said, I'd rather have people like and respect me, but then maybe be a little bit afraid of me than think that I'm a wuss. So the bottom line is sometimes you got to step up. And I think you guys are, you're well on your way to doing that. You've been doing it your whole lives. The problem is you need to get more people in your community to do it. And I think that's going to be the difficult part. As you were saying earlier, Meir, getting young people involved is going to be a key here because, we're all aging out, dude. I'm 46 years old. I don't want to be giving physics lessons when I'm 50. So.
Well, I don't know if you'll realize this, but for the closing song of the week, we're going to have the first annual Israel Now trio as you guys sing happy birthday to Meir Halevi, who today is his birthday. So here's the words.
Yom Huledet Sameach.
Come on, Ryan. Come on, Meir.
You've not heard my voice.
I'm not such a singer. Happy birthday, buddy.
And then after this, Meir, I'll give you the final word.
Sameach.
Okay, Mayor Jolovitz, it's a pleasure, and happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Well, listen, it's we covered a lot of ground today. Every single week, every day, there's so much going on. And we bring the information out on our show every week. We discuss it thoroughly as we can. And there's this intent to have this bike ride for Palestine through the Jewish community to say, in essence, Hitler didn't finish the job and they want to wipe us out. question is, what are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to have another meeting this Monday night at 7 o'clock at the Zionist Center to work on different scenarios, what we can do about it. And we're definitely going to take action. When I receive phone calls from rabbis that are shocked and want action, we have to do what we have to do. And we can't listen to the UJA or so-called Jewish establishment leaders that are never there for us. They are never there for us. And they actually legitimize these Islamic organizations that put on these events. We have to say no. And that's what never again means. It means no. We won't follow that policy of appeasement. And when you look at the larger picture, the Biden administration, with their policy of appeasement and embracing anti-Israel Jew haters, I just hope Naftali Bennett, when he meets with Joe Biden in just over a week, that he has the intelligence to politely say, no, we're not going to accept your pressure or anything. At the end of the day, we all have to look at ourselves in the mirror and ask if we're being truthful to ourselves and if it means really anything to us, our Jewish identity, our Torah. And we have to be accountable. And if we could be bought off and bribed, then you're nothing. You're really nothing. You're a weak individual. But we have to take a stand, and that's what this show is all about. And that's what our whole experience with Never Again is all about. To take a stand, to speak the truth, and never show any fear. And we can't show any fear. We have to stand up strong. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Shalom Aleichem.